A resume today is no longer a summary of your work history. The biggest mistakes that I see usually are objectives. There's no need for an objective in a resume because your objective is to find a job. The other mistake that I often see is that the resume is focused too much on responsibilities and not enough on results.
Let's go! Welcome to the Brand New You Show, the podcast dedicated to helping you build your personal brand. We meet here each week to learn how building your brand can help you grow your influence, amplify your online reputation, and ultimately impact your career. I'm your host, Rhoten, and today we're going to talk all about resumes and essays. Yep, that's right. Two critical documents in today's day and age, both intended to help you properly command and communicate your value. I can hear you already, but wait a minute, Ryan. The resume is dead. I admit, I've heard this sentiment echoed for quite some time now. In fact, sometimes all it takes is to say the word resume, and people will immediately start telling you about their version of the resume obituary. Wanting to finally put an answer to this question once and for all, I asked today's guest what she thinks when she hears someone say the resume is dead.
I disagree. I think that when there's over 250 average applications being submitted for a position and no longer you have necessarily a person reviewing it, sometimes you have a computer software system, which is...
That's Wendi Weiner. Wendi is the founder of writingguru.net. The Writing Guru is a top-ranked global writing service that specializes in creating executive resumes that transcend the competition and your career. Wendi has over 15 years of experience in resume writing, essay writing, and professional editing. She's also a credentialed career manager and is one of only 43 nationally certified resume writers. 43! While that's impressive in and of its own right, I found Wendi's journey to this point to be equally impressive. I was ready to dive into our interview, but before I began peppering her with questions about resumes, keywords, and essays, I asked Wendi my standard opening question. If you could vacation in only one place for the rest of your vacation days, where would you go?
Wow, that's a hard question. I've actually been dreaming of going to Greece.
Okay. Any particular reason Greece pops into your mind?
I think it's very romantic. It's beautiful. It represents a lot of history and definitely a lot of culture there.
So I started my discussion with Wendi by asking her about her background. You see, Wendi spent the first 10 plus years of her career as an attorney practicing law. Then, in 2010, Wendi decided to follow her lifelong vision and dream of helping others perfect their writing and succeed in their career goals. So I had to ask, how do you go from being an attorney to a full-time resume writer? Turns out, I'm not the only one who's asked her that question.
Sure. I get asked that question at least half a dozen times a day. For me, it started back in 2004 when I began practicing law. I was teaching simultaneously college writing classes because I have an education background. Both my parents were educators for over 20 years, and it was something that was really ingrained in me. I love nurturing other people and helping them, and hence why I have a resume writing business now. But what I found was when I was teaching my writing students how to properly write a resume, many of them didn't know how to properly sell themselves in the same sense. So I wound up teaching them interviewing skills and did a lot of career coaching within my class to help propel the students to select a major that they wanted and also to help them develop a career path, because sometimes you go through school and you start taking all these courses, but you really don't know where you want to take your life. And what I found ultimately is that I enjoyed teaching writing and helping people with writing credentials and improving their career paths rather than practicing law. I found it to be very boring, and it just didn't really suit my type of personality that I have. And I just ultimately decided I'm one of those people. I believe in following your dreams. Perhaps it was running 2 marathons that taught me that. But I believe that you should do what makes you happy and feel personally fulfilled every day in your career. And this is what has helped me feel personally fulfilled, is to help others feel personally fulfilled.
As one of 43 nationally certified writers, you could say Wendi already has a leg up on her competition. but I wondered if having a background as an attorney gave her any additional advantages or insights that perhaps her competition doesn't have.
It does. I'm actually the country's only nationally certified resume writer who's also an attorney. And being an attorney, you're trained to think very differently in a very logical, pragmatic, systematic way. And so what I think gives me the leverage is the ability to take the information, to condense it and synthesize it to be as direct, succinct as possible. I remember when I was in my research and writing class in law school and my research and writing professor emphasized clarity, brevity, and simplicity. And that's something that I've employed in legal writing, and it has allowed me to transfer it into resume writing because employers only spend approximately 5 to 7 seconds on a resume. Therefore, you need to be as direct and to the point as possible without going into long details about your job experiences, and you save that type of stuff for the interview process.
5 to 7 seconds. 5 to 7 seconds scanning a resume. Did you know that's about the average attention span of humans today? Let's put that into perspective. Here's a clip of music that is exactly 7 seconds long. That's it. That's all the attention you get. The person who just reviewed your resume is now moving on to the next one. And believe it or not, goldfish have a longer attention span at roughly 9 seconds. If you really only get a 7-second glimpse at your resume, then it would seem to me that the resume is dead argument would actually make sense. So I asked Wendi what she thinks when she hears someone say, the resume is dead.
I disagree. I think that when there's over 250 average applications being submitted for a position and no longer you have necessarily a person reviewing it, sometimes you have a computer software system, which is known as an applicant tracking system, that actually winds up giving you much more of a difficult time and a hurdle to have to jump to get into the interview. So really and truly, the resume is it's not that it's dead. It's that it has now become a different trend. The way that I write a resume now is totally different than how I crafted my own resume as a lawyer for 10 years.
Your resume not only has to capture the share of eyeballs quickly, but it also must get you past this challenging hurdle in the form of a software application called the applicant tracking system. With this in mind, I wondered if Wendi's definition of resumes had changed over her 15 years of experience. So I asked her to define a resume for me.
Sure. A resume today is no longer a summary of your work history. I define it as a strategic marketing document that must properly command and communicate your value.
Understanding all the hoops and hurdles a resume must now jump through in order to get in front of a human, I wondered, is there such a thing as a perfect resume?
I like to think that I create perfect resumes, but I think what you have to really create is the perfect candidate for the job.
As I was researching for the show, I discovered from Wendi's website, writingguru.net, there's actually 3 different types of resumes. There's a chronological resume, a functional resume, and a hybrid resume. I asked Wendi to explain the chronological resume for me.
A chronological resume just simply goes through the work history. It may have a professional summary and a core skills section, but it won't have, let's say, a career highlights section or a skills section per se that goes into great detail about the specific types of skill sets that a job candidate or a job seeker would have.
So the chronological resume documents your work history in, not surprisingly, chronological order. This is what most of us, I think, put together, or at least we attempt to. Now, I'm wondering how a functional or a hybrid resume differs, and when would you use one or the other versus a chronological resume?
A functional format resume is really for someone who is changing career paths. So let's say you're going from nurse into teaching, or you're going from education into research and instructional design. So you would want to emphasize those transferable skill sets in the resume first. And then what I usually do is I do what's called a hybrid resume, which is a chrono-functional format resume. It's a mixture of the two. So because the top third of the resume is the most important, since that's what the employer really scans at first. In order to capture the reader's eyes, you would want to have a skills-based section that sort of goes into detail. For example, if you have strong relationship building skills or business development or sales success and marketing, you could put those skill sets up at the top underneath the professional summary and give examples of how you have effectuated change within a company for those skill sets. And what that does is it presents to the employer a better view of you, that they see that you have those skills before they get to your chronological work history, so that if they were to see someone who was in education for 20 years, they realize that you've done instructional leadership, you've done curriculum development long before they get to the chronological work history.
Very interesting. The top third of the resume is the most important. Did you know the same is true of a website? It's true, and there's a phrase for it, actually. It's called above the fold. This is anything that appears when you first load a website that does not require scrolling on your part to see. Therefore, anything below the fold may never be seen by your visitors if the top 1/3 doesn't capture the reader's attention. Let me unpack this point for a second because I think it's important. You need to choose your resume type based on your objective, and for most of us, the chronological resume is going to work just fine. Career changers, on the other hand, should consider the functional or hybrid type resume. Regardless of the direction you go, the top third of the resume is the most important, and it needs to capture the reader's attention in 5 to 7 seconds. That's a tough task in and of itself, but let's add to this the additional complication of the 250 resumes that get submitted on average for each and every position. At this point in our discussion, I was wondering, how on earth, out of all those resumes and with 5 to 7 seconds, can we get our resume to float to the top, so to speak? So I asked Wendi, how important is resume design in helping a resume stand out from the crowd?
It is important. What I recommend and what the National Resume Writers Association recommends is something that is very minimalistic in design and something that is alluring and attention grabbing. So you don't want your headings to be in 20-point font, but you want them to be at least and no more than 12-point font. Also, what I recommend is having the headings centered, meaning if you have your professional experience, your skills, your education sections, those headings should actually be centered in the page because a reader's eyes naturally gaze at the center of a page rather than to the left side of the margin.
I definitely understand minimalistic. I can be somewhat OCD about clutter, so I get that one, but centering your headers? I had no idea, but I did know that I wanted to know more, so I asked Wendi, what other design elements should we consider when crafting a resume?
Another thing, too, that we focus on is the resume font. That's extremely important as well. That plays into the aesthetics of the resume. Earlier this year, I was actually quoted in the Huffington Post about resume fonts and why Times New Roman and other serif fonts are bad for resumes. And the reason for that is the curvature in the letters actually minimizes the readability in the resume. So it's recommended that a candidate use a sans serif font such as Arial, Tahoma, Calibri. One of my personal favorites is Century Gothic.
Note to self here, switch resume font over to Century Gothic. Got it. Okay, between choosing the right format, centering my headlines, font size, and switching over to a sans serif font, I can see I've got my work cut out for me. Hey, what about you? Is your resume up to these types of standards? Raise your hand. Let me see. Okay, don't raise your hand. This is a podcast. I can't see it. But before you go changing everything, which frankly I was tempted to do at this point in our conversation, I decided instead to pry a little bit further. So I asked Wendi, with all of her years of experience, what are some of the most common mistakes she sees people make on their resume?
That's a great question. I usually scan about anywhere from 6 to 8 resumes on a daily basis that are submitted through my website. And the biggest mistakes that I see usually are objectives. There's no need for an objective in a resume because your objective is to find a job. What you need is a professional summary that properly highlights your skill set. It's sort of the appetizer to the main entree is how I would describe it. And so it gives the reader an impression about you, some of your personality attributes. The other mistake that I often see is that the resume is focused too much on responsibilities and not enough on results accomplishments, achievements, major contributions, things of that nature, things that set you apart from the other job candidates. Because when it comes down to it, for example, if you take an attorney's resume, every attorney drafts motions and pleadings and discovery. But what really separates one attorney from another is perhaps one that leveraged strong negotiation skills to properly settle a $5.4 million negligence claim, those types of things. So you really want to have some type of quantitative or qualitative measurable goals within the resume. And that's something that many job seekers overlook today, that they still believe that the resume has to be based on their job functions and responsibilities.
So how many of you listening were taught to use an objective statement in your resume? By the way, my hand is up. I was. And now it's out of date. Just like that pair of parachute pants some of you may have worn when you were growing up. Are you not exactly sure what an objective statement is? Well, I asked Wendi for an example of an objective statement just to make sure that we were on the same page.
Sure. An objective would be, I'm seeking a position to utilize my strong communication, interpersonal skills to grow with an organization. It comes off very trite and cliche because each job candidate is seeking that. What you really want to have is a more powerful punch to your resume, which is a professional summary. And coincidentally, I never had a professional summary in my own resume as an attorney. But now with the trends that are happening in the resume writing industry, it's actually required for a candidate to have it in order to properly introduce themselves and also for the purpose of applicant tracking systems and keywords.
Okay, so replace objective statement with professional summary. Got it. Of course, this begs the question, how long should your professional summary be?
Sure. I recommend it be what you would have for a standard essay paragraph, which would be 4 to 5 sentences. An important thing is to limit the use of articles. So a and the, you really want to have very short, brief sentences. And also an additional thing is you don't want to have any pronouns within the professional summary or within the resume at all.
Okay, so I'm getting scared to have you ever look at my resume. Articles and pronouns. Boy, I haven't heard about those things in, well, let's just say it's been a while, and I should probably start listening to the Grammar Girls podcast. Anyway, the fact that Wendi even mentioned them says a lot to me about her professionalism and the mastery that she has over her craft. As candidates, we have a lot of hurdles to jump through these days in order to stand out in the job search process. 5 to 7 seconds of eyeball time, resume types, headers, fonts, font sizes, lions, tigers, and bears. Oh my! And to make this worse, all of these hurdles assume we make it past the dreaded applicant tracking system, or ATS for short. The ATS has come up several times on this podcast, but I'm not sure I ever really asked anyone to define it for us, choosing instead to assume that we kind of all already know what it is. So, seizing my chance, I went ahead and decided I'll ask Wendi to define an ATS for us.
Sure. It's a nifty piece of software that many companies use today. In fact, 72% of resumes are not seen by the human eye initially when they are submitted via a website or, let's say, via email. What they are is they're scanned into a software program that ranks the number of keywords within a resume. So when you look at a job description, a lot of times you can guesstimate what the keywords are for the position. And if you, let's say you need to have 13 keywords in order to pass through the applicant tracking system to go to the first round of interviews. If your resume only has 11 keywords, even though you may be completely qualified for the position, you're not going to get called for the interview. Now, the way to determine, and it's not always foolproof, why a company uses an applicant tracking system is a lot of times when you have to upload your resume through their website portal, that's when they utilize the applicant tracking system. Because if you think about it, if there's an average of 250 plus resumes received for one particular position, a company doesn't necessarily have the manpower nor the time and energy to expend on reviewing 250 plus resumes in order to pick out, let's say, 5 to 7 for an interview.
And there they are again, keywords. In case you missed the significance of keywords in my discussion with Todd Lohenry from show 34, here they are again, front and center. The difference is, this time, the lack of keywords or the wrong ones can be linked directly to your ability to get your marketing documents into the pile, along with the other 249 resumes. This is why my discussion about the career upgrade roadmap with Olivia Gamber and Show 58 is so important. If you can avoid the ATS step, why wouldn't you? I think understanding the importance of keywords in a resume is hopefully a given at this point, but I did wonder, who decides the magic number of keywords the ATS is looking for?
Yes, it's keyed in by the company. Now, it's not necessarily a finite number. It can actually also have a range. So let's say the company has a maximum keyword matching of 13 keywords, but you need to have at least 8 to 13 to match in order to move on to the stage for the interview process. That would be more susceptible to the applicant tracking system.
So keywords are important. There is no doubt about that. And the number or range of keywords you need in your resume is defined by the company. But how do we as job candidates determine which keywords to use in the first place?
That actually goes to part of my process, which is I make sure, and I always tell this to the clients, that the resume has to be a branding document. So you want your job search to be narrowly tailored. For example, if you are a sales and marketing executive, I would say 60% of my clients, up to 70% of my clients are sales and marketing executives. So if you're a sales and marketing executive and you work in the sporting goods industry, you definitely would want to look at positions within that industry, that field, and then we take those job postings and I use those as a guide when I'm crafting the resume, because I will match the keywords in the resume that I'm crafting to the job postings that the candidate is interested in.
Okay, matching your keywords to the job posting. That makes total sense to me. However, what if you're a career changer or someone trying to make a career pivot like Linda Spiegel and I discussed in Show 42? We already know these folks would use a functional resume to highlight their transferable skills, but I don't really think transferable skills are keywords. Are they?
They are. For example, I just completed a resume for a woman who was an educator for over 20 years. And what she's looking to do is to go into grant writing, research, and instructional design. So what I did was I researched jobs that would fall into that realm for her. And when I crafted her resume, I focused on core skills that would be necessary. For example, qualitative and quantitative analysis, data analysis, her ability to do a lot of data research as well. So those were core skills that I focused and honed in on her resume to show that the work that she's done has focused in those areas. And obviously also curriculum development and instructional leadership were other key areas of skills for her resume. Her resume wound up being what I call a chronofunctional format resume. The functional format resume, I only use that when someone has had very short job stints. Not necessarily a career changer, but someone who has only worked at companies for, let's say, 5 to 6 months, then has been unemployed for 8 months, and then has worked at another company for 3 to 4 months, because you want to detract from those gaps in employment and really maximize their skill set.
So I stand corrected. But Wendy's answer did make me consider how you handle the differences between younger business professionals, say those of you listening just out of college or very early in your career, versus the more, shall we say, experienced or seasoned business professionals when it comes to the resume?
The younger professional, I actually focus a lot more on volunteer work and also the types of coursework that the younger professional has taken. For example, if the younger professional is in the process of obtaining his or her MBA, or the younger professional is still in, let's say, a full-time program or is in college, I may add a section in the education section for relevant coursework, because that can show a little bit of leverage in terms of continuing professional development. I also look into different types of skill sets that the younger professional may have that they're trying to grow themselves in the leadership capacity. So perhaps they're very involved in the community. Whereas the executive, I will look at them in terms of the amount of growth that they've effectuated over their 20-year career history. And you want to show that growth and expansion through a career highlights section or a career progression section.
Okay, wow. There is a lot more to this resume thing than meets the eye. And I say that without regard to this digital first world that we now live in. And as I've said on nearly every episode of this podcast, we need to be building our brands, growing our influence, and amplifying our online reputations if we want to impact our career. And because we live in this digital first age, that means as business professionals, young or experienced, we have to embrace LinkedIn. Like it or not, LinkedIn is where recruiters and hiring managers go these days in order to find potential job candidates. So we need a LinkedIn strategy. And unfortunately, for many people, maybe even some of you listening today, our strategy has consisted of just copying and pasting our resumes into LinkedIn. So I asked Wendi, is this really a good strategy?
It's not. And actually, I recently published an article on LinkedIn about that. And the reason for that is the amount of self-plagiarism is so prevalent in the LinkedIn world. I mean, I've seen resume writers copy other resume writers' LinkedIn profiles for some of their keywords and targeted markets. I've seen sales and marketing professionals copy other sales and marketing professionals' LinkedIn profiles. And who's to say that if we were both in the sales and marketing realm and we're both currently looking for a job and you like my LinkedIn profile and you decide to take my summary, copy and paste it into your resume, and hypothetically I use that same summary for my own resume and we both apply for the same job, the question is left, who plagiarized who? The employer doesn't know who actually had the summary first.
Plagiarism? I still can't believe people actually do that. I would never have thought of that.
Well, and you kind of have to put it into perspective, Ryan, because think about it. Your resume only gets distributed to a hand select number of people, but your LinkedIn profile is viewable by 400 million users on there.
I guess some people must just look at the size of LinkedIn and automatically assume that the odds are stacked against them. And they think, hey, I'll just copy somebody else's profile because that's going to increase my chances of being found during a search. So as you can hopefully see, this strategy of plagiarism is fraught with issues right out of the gate. I mean, looking back at just this conversation, if we're setting up our resumes correctly, we're tailoring them to a specific job in a specific niche or market or industry. So if you align your LinkedIn profile in the same manner and someone else copies your profile, their ideal position may be completely different than yours, which means that they've just positioned themselves out of the market that they want to be in. This absolutely doesn't make any sense to me. And in addition to that, the way you use keywords in LinkedIn, it's different than the way you use them in a resume, I think. Is that right, Wendi?
They are. I actually when I do a client's resume and I do a client's LinkedIn profile, 95% of my clients actually have me do both. When I do the LinkedIn profile, I will look at the summary that I created for the resume and just put a completely different spin on it to add in pronouns, to make it more of a story. I can take a person's career history and go through it in a lot more detail. I will have some of the same keywords, but I'll focus a lot on the industry keywords that will populate more in LinkedIn searches. For example, if you have sales and marketing analysis, in your LinkedIn profile, you'd want to keep getting endorsements because that helps build your searchability in LinkedIn as well.
Back to pronouns again. I jest, but I get it. LinkedIn should tell a story. It should give anyone reading it an idea of who you are and what you're all about. This, of course, means using keywords in the right places, starting with your headline.
Statistics show that you need to use at least 10 to 15 keywords within your summary and at least 2 to 3 keywords in your LinkedIn headline, which should make it more broad and compelling.
Don't forget, LinkedIn is a business-focused site, which I believe means that we probably should rein in our creativity with the headline just a little bit. Wendi agrees.
Yeah, you definitely want to keep it to a professional extent, but a great spin on a LinkedIn profile, which proved to be very successful for one of my clients, was to have her listed as a sales and marketing professional and then include a bullet point and then after it have something along the lines of seeking new opportunity with growing organization in the South Florida area. And this client of mine actually was contacted by a huge healthcare organization on LinkedIn. She did not even send her resume to them. They actually contacted her. She wound up then submitting her resume, went on an interview, traveled to Salt Lake City for training, and is now gainfully employed with them and making a great salary.
Did you catch it? Wendi said something there that caught my attention, so I decided to dig just a little bit deeper. Fantastic. You mentioned it. Do you recommend people put seeking new employment? So if they're out of work or if they're looking for a new job, do you recommend that they actually put that in their headline?
I do, because 94% of recruiters source out job seekers on LinkedIn. So imagine how many recruiters and headhunters are on LinkedIn every day searching for new candidates for easy placement.
Some of you may already know, and for those of you who don't, my oldest son, Noah, will be heading to college soon. I'll spare you my personal feelings on this, but as we start the process of looking at colleges and the admission process itself, one of the things that stands out to me is the admission essay. I bring this up because Wendi's company, The Writing Guru, also helps with admissions essays. Wendi may disagree with this statement, but I kind of liken the admission essay for a college applicant to the resume for a job candidate. It's a requirement to complete as part of the application process. No essay, no admission. I asked Wendi to define what is the admission essay.
Sure. It's for high school students or even college students who are applying to either a college program or a graduate school program. I assist in crafting the personal statements and the admissions essays. Now, that doesn't mean that I write them for the students, but I do have different packages from either the brainstorming process where they need to come up with the theme for their admissions essay or even just doing the final editing and proofreading.
So why is the admission essay so important today?
It's a lot more important than parents and students think. And the reason for that is getting into college today is so much more competitive than it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. So when two students apply with pretty much the same GPA and about the same SAT or ACT score, what does the admissions company look at next? They begin to look at the admissions essay. That's the next step that they go to. So the admissions essay can either make you or break you. A very compelling admissions essay can really help a student. For example, if you have a student who has suffered with a learning disability or who has autism or Asperger's, maybe they've had grade changes, maybe they've actually had some behavioral problems in school, but those things have actually made a better foundation for the student to apply to the college. And it can really lead to something more compelling for the student.
Interesting. In my opinion, it's just like a website for a job candidate. If you take two candidates who are identical on paper, but one has a website where they post their thoughts and comments on a specific topic, and the other does not, which is the more appealing candidate to you? If you look at the admission essay in the same light, I decided to ask Wendi what parents and students should keep in the forefront of their minds as the keys to success for the admission essay.
Definitely be unique and be personable. You want to open up to the admissions committee. You want to show facets of your personality that can't necessarily be seen from just your GPA, your ACT or SAT or ACT scores. So you definitely want to be more dynamic. You want to be a multidimensional person. I go back to the idea of a round character versus a flat character in literature. I was a literature nerd in college and high school, so forgive me for making a metaphor there. But I think what you want to be is you want to be a round character. You want to see different dimensions within your personality.
I don't know about you, but I see a lot of parallels between applying for a job and applying to a college. As Wendi was telling us about the importance of the essay, I immediately saw another parallel with LinkedIn, so I asked her about it. Do colleges also look at, say, social media profiles? So, for example, a LinkedIn profile, and could you take the admission essay and use that as your summary if you're a high school student trying to get accepted to a college?
I actually wouldn't recommend using it for the summary, but I would recommend to every high school student now, today, since we are living in a very advanced digital age, to have a LinkedIn profile that is professional in nature, that does discuss some of the extracurricular activities and serves as an introduction to who you are. But I wouldn't use it for promoting your essay because of the ability of self-plagiarism again.
In this digital age, we need to give our children every advantage. This means they should have a LinkedIn profile. And okay, I hear there's some of you right now who are thinking, a LinkedIn profile, that's crazy, Ryan. They don't have anything to put on it. I wondered this exact same thing as well. So I asked Wendi. Okay, so if they're in, say, sports or extracurricular activities such as clubs, I'm thinking like the robotics club, maybe they're a leader in that club, you would recommend those are the types of things that they would put on a LinkedIn profile.
Yes. And I would also recommend cleaning up the Facebook and the Twitter and Snapchat and Instagram and making sure that it's private and that at least your main photo is something professional-like in nature.
Okay. Those are some great tips. I'm sure there's a lot of folks who are listening in who have children that are either at that age or getting close to being at that age where this is going to become something that will be a big focus for them, whether they realize it or not, in the next few years.
Right. I agree. I mean, when I graduated high school many, many moons ago, over 20 years ago. For me, we didn't have cell phones. We didn't have social media, and social media has really changed a lot of things. And now employers have the ability and colleges have the ability to Google the students' names. And, one bad thing that they find out about the student can disqualify them from getting admitted to the college or graduate school of their dreams.
One bad thing discovered online can keep your child from getting into the school of their dreams. One bad thing. You know where I stand on this issue. As business professionals, we need to be purposefully building our brands online. And in this digital first age, this also means that your children need to start building their brands as well. Of course, not to the same extent as you and I, but to the extent that they are aware of what they post online stays there forever, which means that someday, in some unexpected way, something they post could come back and haunt them. Maybe even keep them out of a specific college. We've covered a lot of ground at this point in our discussion, both for business professional and for the coming generation of business professionals. I think you'll agree that getting into anything, a job or a university, is much more difficult today than it ever has been. We need every advantage we can get, from networking with the right people, as David Fisher from Show 43 would tell us, to drafting the perfect resume. To do this, sometimes we do need help. And while it may seem obvious at this point, I decided to go ahead and ask Wendi, why should someone hire a professional resume writer? Here's what she had to say.
I get asked that question a lot as well. I think it comes to the point when you're searching for a job and you're not getting any bites at your resume, meaning you're sending out resume after resume and no one's calling you for an interview. The other thing to consider is that it's very difficult at times to quantify everything that you've done and to write about yourself. It's a lot easier to have someone write it for you. There's an old adage that goes, a lawyer who is his own client has a fool for a client. So I always recommend that if you're a lawyer and you're going to sue someone, you don't represent yourself. You have someone else do it for you who is more of an expert. And it's the same thing with a resume writer, is that a trained resume writer who's very involved and published in the industry is going to know about the recent trends, is going to know about the structure of the resume, how it should be properly formed, framed, organized, all of those things. And sometimes putting it into the hands of the expert or the professional is much better. And the other simple analogy I can give is you wouldn't hire a general physician to operate on you for cardiac problems. You'd want a board certified cardiologist to do that.
Great analogy. And interestingly enough, Mark Miller from Show 49 gave the same advice about writing your LinkedIn profile. Have somebody else do it for you. You're just too close to it. For me, the reasons to hire a resume writer make sense. But sticking with Wendi's analogy, before I'd hire a cardiologist, I'll ask around a little bit and do some research on the different individuals before signing that check. And while our options for medical care may actually limit the amount of research we can do, the options for resume writers seem endless. So I asked Wendi, what should we look for when considering hiring a resume writer?
Well, I actually always, in a consultation call, offer a series of questions that a job seeker should definitely ask any resume writer they consult with. I always recommend consulting with at least 2 to 3 resume writers because every resume writer is going to have a different style. And you want to make sure that you develop a strong personal rapport with the resume writer. The other thing, too, to ask is credentials. Credentials really matter. There's many different certifications out there. I definitely recommend hiring a nationally certified resume writer because there's a very small number of them, and we are truly the best in the industry. It's a very rigorous program. There are some other advanced certifications out there, but those organizations are not through the National Resume Writers Association, and that is the one that really governs the resume writing industry. Another thing to ask is about publications, involvement, leadership in the industry, because then you could really tell how involved the resume writer is in also improving his or her own writing skills. The National Resume Writers Association has an annual conference every year. There's always professional development and training seminars. So you want someone who's very active in the industry and who also has a blog, who actively posts, who's very active in social media. And definitely you want to ask about involvement in terms of how long the person's been writing. And the final question I think is very important is the resume writer the sole writer of your resume, or do they offer a team of writers? Sometimes the team of writers can be great because it means a shorter turnaround time. But the caveat to that is that you may wind up having a junior level writer writing your resume who's not nationally certified.
So now you know. There's a lot that goes into writing a resume. So if you're interested in learning more about Wendi or the services offered by the Writing Guru, here's how you can get in touch with Wendi.
Definitely connect with me on LinkedIn. If you search for Wendi Weiner or the Writing Guru, you'll find my page on LinkedIn. You can also go to my website, which is www.writingguru.net. And you can also find me through the National Resume Writers Association.
I also believe that folks listening to this can book a free 30-minute consultation with you, correct?
Yes, they can. And they can also upload their resume for the free consultation.
As with all of my guests, I asked Wendi if there was anything else she would like to share with us as we close out today's show.
I think that if you are looking for a new job in 2016, I definitely recommend considering the consultation with either me or another resume writer out there to really get your resume in shape because of the way the job market is now and the competition, as well as consider having your LinkedIn profile professionally written. There are still professionals out there who do not utilize LinkedIn. 5 years ago, it may not have been as important, but today it is the number one job search engine to use. Companies are posting jobs on LinkedIn and no longer posting jobs on Indeed, Monster, or Career Builder. So definitely get your LinkedIn profile in tip-top shape, make it optimized and marketable for you.
Holy cow. I don't know about you, but I've got some work to do on my resume. Thank you, Wendi, for being a guest on the show today and sharing your resume writing tips with us. I think it's safe to say that you've given us all some homework to do. For you listening in today, a heartfelt thank you goes out to you as well. I greatly appreciate you pointing the dial of your phone each and every week to the show. If you enjoy the show, I would also greatly appreciate if you headed on over to your favorite podcatcher and left a rating and review. Both help raise the visibility of the show, which means that we can get the words of our guests out in front of a broader audience each and every week. And speaking of the show, you may have noticed that I changed things up a bit this week, so I'm interested in your feedback. Let me know your thoughts either on Twitter using the hashtag BNYChat, that's BNYChat, all together, or head on over to Facebook at facebook.com/brandnewyou-podcast. And of course, you can always email me directly at rlrhoten@gmail.com. That wraps us up for today. The show notes can all be found on the website at ryanrhoten.com/Wendi Weiner. Until next week, I've been Ryan, and I'm out.